Good morning, good afternoon, and a good day to everyone. Today I'm bringing a new, I guess you could say, series to the Talos Mobius channel, and that is Mobile Suit Deep Dives, where we're going to be talking a lot more about the mechanical engineering, mechanical design, and backstory, and a lot more about, well, said mobile suits. Today is joining me the fantastical Midnight Hatter. Say hello, good sir.
Hey, thank you for having me. I'm excited to get wet, so to speak, on this deep dive. This is obviously a topic after my own heart, so I appreciate you honoring me with a guest spot on your channel.
The topic of today is actually a topic that I think many people that enjoy Zeta will be happy about, and it would be talking about the Zeta Gundam itself and everything that comes along with it. How it was a great point of interest and importance during the Universal Century of Gundam, and how it changed Gundam overall for the rest of time. What we're going to be talking about and what we're starting off from is pretty simple. The Zeta Gundam during Mobile Suit Zeta Gundam and Double Zeta was a very high performance suit that by the end of Zeta was said to be outperformed, and yet it performed better than most units. Now, when it comes to deep diving Zeta Gundam, there's no better than Hatter himself. So, what are your thoughts
Oh,
on the fact that obviously the Zeta was said to be outperformed, and yet we saw it perform feats that we've never seen before?
well, it's when you consider that it was designed by a 17-year-old kid, um, who, even though his father was a prolific designer himself in Franklin Badon, Camille Badon actually designed the Zeta Gundam starting from the Gundam Mark II, which was already, as we know, an inferior machine when it was fielded in the early stages of the Grips conflict, and combining that with the flying armor that was used while the Gundam Mark II was on Earth. And so, put two and two together and you get a transforming mobile suit like the Zeta Gundam. Now, of course, I think Anaheim Electronics contributed a lot to the internal components that make it the high performing unit that you've alluded to. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that and kind of explore because it does follow that same sort of arc as the RX-78, right? Where by the end of the 1 Year War, you saw mobile suits such as the Gelgoog or the Dom or the Rick Dom that could outperform the RX-78, but due to factors such as the pilot and routine upgrades, it still managed to stay relevant late into the war.
And that's true. There is a lot of questions that people always ask. If the Zeta was so outdated by the time of the, well, when we reached near the end of the first war, what happened? Why was it able to, well, forgive me for saying it this blatantly, but decimate an entire fleet on its own, pretty much, destroying things like the Boundock, dealing with the Hambrabis, making, well, VO appear almost like a joke with a very famous quote of VO, why won't you move?
Right.
And for that, we're going to be talking a lot about the mobile suit itself. To begin, the Zeta actually had a much better reactor than most other units at its era, at 2000, well over 2000 uh, kilowatts. If I remember correctly, it was 2020 kilowatts specifically, making it one of the strongest in reactors mobile suits of its era. And yet, as mentioned before, even the reactor and its high speed, it still was referred to as an outdated mobile suit because of how early during the war it was made. Well, early, in
Mhm.
comparison to other units like the O, the Pallas Athene, the Bondok, and the Cubile. And speaking of which, when the Zeta had to rival things like the Hambrabili, the Cubile, the O, it always stayed on top. Any thoughts as to why that could be?
Well, I suppose the obvious answer, and I think we'll probably talk about this in depth as we get into it, is the Psychomu device that is not as widely explained in universe. So the biosensor Psychomu device is not the same as say the Psychomu devices that you see that control funnels or that was installed in the Psycho Gundam that allowed 4 to control the entire Gundam remotely, but it is a prototype sort of quasi Psychomu device that was installed in the Zeta Gundam by Anaheim Electronics. And we don't really get a lot of details about who specifically designed it or what its how it works. I think that you had a funny joke earlier about, we don't know how it works, but we know that it works, and that's good enough, right?
Exactly. And it was proof, even during the end of the war, about, well, that it worked. During the end of the First Grips War, it just worked. It made the Zeta, it cemented the Zeta as one of the strongest mobile suits in history, so much so that it was used in the continuation of Double Zeta. And during issue 100 in one of the mangas, it was remade as a congratulatory unit. It was considered such an important unit that it stood up there with the Gundam, the Zaku, uh, pretty much iconic mobile suits that it stood out even in the universe.
Yeah, it's definitely emblematic of that era, and especially when you consider the Gundam franchise as a whole, and you see a lot of the mobile suit designs that have been sort of expanded upon and additional side stories as they come out. You see different designs that are released. They all kind of owe a bit of inspiration to the Zeta itself because it was the first transforming machine, and you saw the Titans and Xeon both kind of competing to keep up with this transforming machine technology. And I think that it was almost as if they kind of missed the point, right? They thought that the Zeta Gundam was special because it transformed, when in reality, it was the interior components and the pilot itself that made the Zeta Gundam as formidable as it was.
And that leads perfectly to what we were talking about as well, and to what everyone talks about, the biosensor. Why was the biosensor so effective while Camille was piloting, and yet when Luca piloted the unit honestly felt, unfortunately, like a side character joke? The old grandpa of the show that just came back up just to be poked at for fun.
Yeah, so I forget what article it was in New Type magazine where they kind of ranked the power of new types overall, and Camille was rated as the strongest new type, but maybe not the most mentally stable. At least among himself, Judo, Ashta, and Amuro Ray. And so it's it's not surprising to me to suggest that maybe Camille had either a closer tie to the Psychomo device than Ruluka did, or it was just the sheer magnitude of his psycho waves that allowed him to operate the mobile suit. But really, what the biosensor system was designed to do is that it was supposed to allow a new type pilot to more easily interface with the components of the mobile suit. And so really it was designed to kind of control the sort of micro movements, if you will. So things like, the ankle skirt armor that you would normally have to build in a specific type of uh, mechanical feature that would allow things like the shoulder armor to rotate or the ankle skirt armor to rotate in order to allow the mobile suit to move in particular ways. The biosensor system automated those processes by using the sort of intent of the pilot and using their brain waves to kind of predict what the pilot was trying to do. Now, of course, it also had a surprising side effect that Camille was able to trigger late in the series, which was to amplify the mobile suit's performance. And again, that's something that we don't understand how it did it or why it did it, but it did, and it was something that Ruluka was never able to replicate, or Judo Ashta for that matter. And Judo Ashta also an incredibly powerful new type, yet he was unable to kind of tap into that secret power up, if you will, the super robot.
And that is actually entertaining because going back to Camille, the very pilot of the Zeta, when you see what he was able to give Judo as powers, when apparently near the end of Double Zeta, Judo received some of Camille's powers, the Double Zeta exhibited similar qualities with its biosensor as that of the Zeta, making it a lot more powerful than it already was. Just like, for an example, the Zeta was able to deflect beams, so was the Double Zeta, which makes you wonder how much power did the biosensor give to the Zeta and how powerful was the base unit itself? There have been a few sources that suggest that the biosensor enhanced the Zeta's performance by up to 7 times in some cases.
Yeah, and it's funny that I don't have any specific numbers, but in an interview, Yoshiyuki Tomino said that Camille's collapse had to happen because what what he was trying to do, and he kind of alludes to this when he's you know calling on the help of his fallen Ayug allies, and he's trying to defeat Shirako, is he knows that Shirako could beat him. And so the quote from Tamino says, in other words, Camille was forcibly trying to exceed his limitations to obtain power. There was no way to let him obtain that which was beyond his capacity without there being some kind of consequence. And so, with that in mind, it's not surprising that we never see that power, that ability to deflect beams, that ability to freeze a mobile suit in its place, the way that Camille seems to do with the O. That is never replicated again because no pilot ever paid that cost again. And it's kind of a one-time uh, Deus Ex Machina type effect that he was able to unlock within the Zeta Gundam.
And this is actually a perfect way to use examples as to why the Zeta became such an iconic unit, because we see very similar things to happen in the future. And you were right, we didn't see something get as close as to Camille until, ironically, Unicorn, where we see the Unicorn Gundam reach its luminous crystal form when Banagher exceeds the limits of his own, and as pretty much it was suggested, he, spoilers, died in the cockpit, and yet he came back because of the psychoframe throughout the Unicorn. So, just because of that, and talking about how iconic Zeta is, we see a lot of ties with the technology and the performance that pretty much made the Zeta iconic live throughout time in UC and even in our own world, because we see very often references to what the Zeta was able to do. Camille, although he's not talking about very often, he is still one of the strongest, if not the strongest new types, according to Yoshiyuki Tomino, when it comes to skill. And when it comes to power, he very often says Jurao, so I'm guessing that combining those two was what made the enhanced double Zeta perform the output that melted its own crest and pushed the Cubile back into, well, the asteroid that it was buried under.
Yeah, exactly. And you've said it 1,000 times, and I have to concede this point is that Gundam Unicorn as a series is really a love letter to all of Gundam. There's so many hidden gems and Easter eggs that if you are a real fan of the Universal Century and you watch Unicorn, you'll start to see these sort of ties come together. And so it's like you said, it's very rewarding to see something like Banagher unlocking the power of the Unicorn Gundam that is seemingly inspired directly by the technology that you see in Zeta Gundam.
And talking about inspired technology, as you put it earlier, we see that there are always shades of Zeta. Things like the Delta Plus being the finalized version of the Delta, and obviously the Hyakusiki, because of how well the Zeta performed. The Rezel, which uses, yeah, it used the Mathes's transformation, it still was called the Rezel. The Rigizi, They find Gundam Zeta. The Zeta always finds its way there. The Zeta never stayed away. It was always there.
That's right. It's there's that saying like you can't catch lightning in a bottle. It's almost like throughout the remainder of the Universal Century, they were really trying to catch lightning in a bottle twice because the Zeta was such a unique unit. And I can just imagine, veterans of the Grips conflict, y- all of these soldiers that are around there watching Camille pilot the Zeta Gundam and just all of a sudden emit this pink glow that seemingly deflects beams and then just, cut down Hambrabi, which is one of the most feared Titans mobile suits of the time, piloted by one of the most vicious, maybe not a new type, but, you know, one of the most vicious pilots with a notorious reputation for being ruthless. And and the Zeta Gundam is kind of just brushes it off. Um, so it's yeah, I think that you tend to see people trying to recreate that magic, whether it's the Zeta Plus, whether it's the Rigazi, or even just any of the Rizel line. Yeah, it stands out and it stands the test of time for sure.
And, even talking about transformables, as much as the transformables may have almost disappeared during the era of F91, they still resurfaced during Crossbone, and even some manga of Victory has a lot of transformables. Zeta revolutionized mobile suit development for so long that even afterwards, people, as you put it, were trying to catch lightning in a bottle. And that lightning was the light of Zeta itself. I doubt that people that saw it suddenly extend the beam saber into a hyper beam saber, which was impossible with its reactor output, mind you. Its reactor output was 2020. 2000 alone had to go to that hyper beam saber. That's why the double Zeta had 3 reactors that made it reach almost 7,000 in output to be able to sustain hyper beam saber output constantly on its sabers. And yet, for a split moment, the Zeta was able to reach a feared mobile suit from so far away with just a beam saber slash. That was the light of Zeta. The light of Zeta began so early, and I think that as you mentioned before, as you mentioned it, it was brought back when Camille decided to put away the O by keeping it locked in place. That light, I think people saw it a lot more. Amongst death, they saw light, the light of victory for the AUG. One
Yeah,
mobile suit,
definitely. And
one mobile suit became the light of victory. Almost like how in C we have Gigi being, sorry, in Hathaways we have Gigi being referred to the goddess of victory. Well, if we ever want to look at a god or a goddess of victory, despite of what you may want to call it, the Zeta was always up there.
oh, definitely. And I mean, I think that it's no accident that the title of the third movie and kind of the overarching tagline of the Zeta Gundam series is "Love is the pulse of the stars." And so, when you see that Zeta Gundam and it's interesting because it was powered by not only Camille's anger but also the love of the people that he had lost up to that point. And it was, it sounds kind of corny when you think about it, but like it really is Camille's love that killed Shirako's hate because he was channeling all of the emotions and all of the bonds that he had formed with his friends up to that point. And so then when he tapped into that again in order to help Judo, it was the same that same uh, power of love, so to speak, that he lent to Judo in order to power up the double Zeta.
And that is perfect because going back to Unicorn, if you remember, the sole reason Banadzer got in the way of the colony laser was to protect the colony builder that Audrey or Minerva was in.
Spoilers.
Spoilers for something that was, what, 16 years ago now?
Oh yeah, just about.
Just about. But, looking into it, the Sage of Zeta, and I think that's what also led to one of my favorite manga series, Advance of Zeta to be born. The Zeta as a series not only has its Sage everywhere, not only does the Zeta itself has Sage everywhere, but the technology and the philosophy behind what Zeta was is what leads to us going back always. We're always going back. It's I The best way to describe it was the master stroke of UC. The Universal Century saw its peak there because everything evolved and evolved from there. The psychoframe that the new and the Sazabi used, which led to the new pushing back one of the largest threats of humanity, one thing that could send Earth into nuclear winter, and the new was able to push it back just on its own because of the light of the human heart, which leads back to love is the pulse of love is the pulse of stars. It
That's
leads
right.
back
Yeah, it's
to hope, a very strong emotion again.
yeah, I think that a lot of Gundam series get a bad rap because, they tend to be described as, dark or fatalistic, but I mean, I'm sure you would agree with me that almost every Gundam series ends with a story and a message of hope. And, you know, Lala herself told Amuro at the end of Mobile Suit Gundam, you don't have anyone to protect. You're just fighting just to fight. And you don't have that with Amuro in Char's counterattack. You don't have that with Camille because Camille is by the end of the Grips conflict is begging for the strength to stop Shirako because he's seen all of the, havoc that he's wreaked upon the galaxy, and he knows that he cannot afford to let this threat go on. And so, he kind of sacrifices himself as a way of, you know, stopping this threat in much the same way that Amuro sacrifices himself in order to stop Axis from falling onto Earth, um, and Benager sacrifices himself several times. Whether it's uh, whether it's helping the Granciere uh, reach out, what is it,
Then I hell
altitude
Argama.
in order to,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, these are acts of people that are trying to protect the ones that they love. These are acts of people that are willing to sacrifice whatever it takes in order to do so. And I think that the Zeta Gundam as a design and as a kind of emblem of that, it just continues to sort of echo throughout the Universal Century.
No matter where you look, in the end, there is going to be always a state of Zeta. And that's what makes, personally, the Zeta one of the best units, even though it was by the end of, the Grips War, outperformed, outgunned, and, well, as much as people may not realize it, outpowered and overpowered by things like the Bound Dock with its much superior reactor and much stronger frame. It still always found a way to win because the strongest emotions always win, and greed is only done for oneself, as you put yourself. Something that I was reading
Right.
recent in Mobile Suit Gundam Pulitzer was, and I don't know if you've heard about it. It's a manga about what was her name? Kika, the one of the three, the girl of the three kids
Oh,
on the
right.
white base. She was trying to
Yes.
write an autobiography on Amuro. Sorry, a biography on Amuro for her to know at least what happened to someone she considered her friend after his disappearance. And she's always got it into this wild hunt of trying to figure out what Amuro truly loved and what led him to be who he became in the end of the war. He was fighting for hope. He was fighting for humanity. What gives people those feelings of love and care? And I think Camille By the end of the Grips War, showed very strongly who he cared about, and he was fighting not only for those that died, but for those that were still alive.
That's right. I mean, I- yeah, yeah. I couldn't say it better, honestly. It's, he uh he was a character that obviously struggled with a lot of negative emotions throughout his life and throughout the career that he had during the Grips conflict. And I don't know what was the sort of inciting incident that allowed him to sort of unlock the hidden powers of the biosensor, but whatever it was, whether it was, Emma's death or whether it was when he thought that Quattro had been killed, which, he didn't even really see that happen. But something kind of set a light in Camille that allowed him to tap into something that the Zeta Gundam, like I said, it's not something that we can really understand. And I think that the wiki kind of mentions that when the pilot is mentally or emotionally focused, usually when they're angry or upset, that's what unlocks the biosensor's abilities. I would like to challenge that because if that were the case, the O has the biosensor system installed on it as well. And are you telling me that, a powerful new type like Paptimus Shirako would be unable to unlock the powers of the biosensor with his pure unbridled rage? I think that there's something different going on here, and I think that that's where it's Camille's love that unlocks that power and not hate or anger.
And I agree with that statement because when you look into it well enough, you're right. Optimus was a very strong new type. Even in the Dynasty Warriors games, he's referred to as an overwhelming new type, meaning that his power should be more than enough to power up the O and enhance it to the levels of the Zeta. And yet, we never see anything close to that. The closest that there was its melee performance, but the O was made for it. The
Yeah,
Zeta
that's
was
right.
not.
Exactly right. And I mean, Tomino even said that at the time, Shirako would have been the most powerful new type alive. In the production notes for Zeta Gundam, it was always suggested that Shirako was going to kill Char by the end of the series. Now, for obvious reasons, outside of the universe, talking about like production, things and like getting Char's counterattack greenlit and all of that stuff. They decided to rewrite the ending of Zeta Gundam to where Char was not killed. But, that was always the intent, was that Char and Camille were not going to be enough to stop Shirako.
And yet, though, in the end, following to what you said, it seems that there was an emotion a lot stronger that led to Camille's power. And one thing that I'd like to point is that Gundam likes a lot its visual cues. And if you notice, the biosensor every time it activates in certain mobile suits, it's pink. And yet, the psycho waves that the Boundock emitted were red, like raids.
Right.
So I wonder if the
Yeah.
color means anything. Could it mean love, as you mentioned? Because Camille was fighting for the people that he cared about. Zero was fighting for the people that he cared about. The rainbow that the new and the Sazabi produced was all about hope in the long run. Because, as mentioned before, Sar at the end maybe saw what Amuro saw. Maybe he saw hope as well.
Right. Yeah, he describes it as a warm feeling, right?
Yeah.
Which, there's the obvious reasons of burning up in the atmosphere that he could feel slightly warm, but I think that the feeling he was describing was more associated with the Axis effect, as it was later known. But yeah, I mean, to quote, I think your favorite line from Gundam Unicorn, it's even so. That's it, that's what Camille probably would have been saying is even so, in the face of such unbridled hatred and fear as someone like Shirako, even so, we we charge ahead. I know that that's not as much of a technical explanation for why the Zeta Gundam was able to achieve these types of feats, but I think that, you know, Mobile Suit Gundam in general typically is referred to more of like a real robot genre of anime when I think that sometimes you see a bit of that super robot creep in there, and I think that this is one of the big examples of that is, you know, there's no mechanical explanation for what makes the biosensor work. All that we know is that it taps into the emotions and the sort of mental state of the pilot of the mobile suit and like you said, manages to improve its performance up to 7 times its, you know, base performance levels. So I mean, that alone would raise its power output from 20 kilowatts to, you know, 14,000. So um yeah, I think that there's something supernatural going on.
It's just an inkling, you could say. We can't know for sure, though. The best way to describe it in the long run, though, is that what really makes the Zeta unique is not only the Zeta itself is such an iconic mobile suit. It's not only the emotions that surround the Zeta. It's not just the story and the technological advances that surround the Zeta. It's not the pilot, but it's the whole package. If it wasn't as it was, we saw what the Zeta was like with just through Luca in a very similar setup, and yet it didn't produce the same feeling. So I think that what made the Zeta was the whole package, wouldn't you say?
Oh, definitely. And I think that, you know, throughout the rest of the Universal Century, you see a lot of close approximations, but nothing ever really gets that close to copying what the Zeta Gundam did.
And at times it's better this way to not copy something because the more you copy it, the more you will want to see it less. With it being just a one-time thing and just referred to in the future again through Unicorn and obviously a bit of a narrative we see that as well with the Fennecs for those interested. You can watch it at any given time, probably somewhere online or buy it online. I'm not gonna spoil that as well. It's a more recent movie, but we see it with the narrative. We see that same feeling again, just done in a much tamer way, and we see just how far in the cycle frames get, and it makes you wonder would the biosensor ever reach that point.
Good question. You know, we see a lot of different types of Psychomu devices, things like the exam system, the Hades system, NTD system, you know, basically every acronym under the sun, right? But all of them do something slightly different. They all kind of access different areas of the brain or do different things for the mobile suit to operate. But the biosensor is one of those mystery ones, and we get to see some very cool examples later on of, you know, different advancements in that sort of in that Psychomu realm, but nothing that really does the exact same thing. So, like you said, it's probably for the best that it remain sort of a mystery, similar to all of the Psycho Frame technology that we see sort of in Char's counterattack and Unicorn, but um, it is very cool to see for that brief moment.
And overall, what I'd like to say as a last at least thing, unless you have anything more to add, as this is more of a video that is food for thought more than anything. What I think overall with the variations of the quasi psychomu or psychomu devices is that in the long run it also gives us more stories that can touch a slightly different subject than that of Zeta. Zeta
Yeah,
that way
absolutely.
remains unique to itself, but it becomes one of the best stories of UC because of what it is.
Definitely. Yeah. I love the idea of it being, you know, not only was it foundational, but I think that it's still remains unique among all of the various side stories and different narratives that we've explored in Gundam.
That leaves us to the conclusion of this video at least. If you were to say anything about the Zeta, about how you feel towards it, especially after our conversation, do you feel like there's a lot more to delve into, or do you feel like we covered everything and just revisiting this video in the future would not work?
I would be interested in kind of doing comparisons. I think that we've definitely talked about everything that we possibly can on the Zeta Gundam itself. But like I mentioned, with all of these other different Psychomu devices, I would be interested in hearing your takes about how they relate to one another. You mentioned sort of the color keying of the pink light of the biosensor compared to like the red light of other Psychomu devices. Some Psychomu devices are powered by the souls of the dead, such as the exam system and the Hades system. So it'd be interesting to see if, the source of the power is kind of related to what you see the mobile suit do, right?
I agree.
So I would definitely be interested in doing more comparative looks at the Zeta Gundam, but I think that this has been a very good speculative view about what the Zeta Gundam was capable of.
I'm glad to hear it from your coming out from your mouth, as I'm really happy with our conversation today. I'm looking forward to doing this again. If you would also be interested in doing so with other mobile suits, may it be something like the Sazabi Unicorn, or may it be with units like the Blue Destiny units and the Pale Riders, or anything of the sort. We have a lot of units to cover. Hades, Exam, Nitro System. We're gonna be here all day if we're gonna talk about them.
That's right. No, I think that this is I am so honored to be a part of this series, and of course, I'd love to hop on and talk with you again about some of these mobile suits that are really stand out. We can talk until the cows come home about things like Zaku's and Goofs, but when you start getting into some of these mobile suits that kind of are iconic to the in-universe lore, you start to get into some of the real fun of Gundam. So
Well, I'm looking forward to doing this again then. This is gonna be the end of the video. Thank you everyone for joining us today in this wonderful discussion. Have a good day, have a good night, and we'll talk to you later.